You should get ready for the return of Messiah. It is finally happening, and no one will be able to stop it. For years, the Third Temple in Jerusalem has been a controversial topic, but now the truth is going to prevail, and we will witness the start of the Messianic age. The Third Temple has a long history of being built and destroyed. Also known as Third House of the Sanctum, the Third Temple refers to the temple which will be built in Jerusalem and will be the successor to Solomon's Temple and the Second Temple. Solomon's Temple, known as the First Temple or the First House of the Sanctum, was constructed during the reign of David's son, Solomon, and completed in 957 BCE. Solomon's Temple was the crowning achievement of King Solomon's reign. According to the religious scriptures, Solomon's father, King David, wanted to build the Great Temple a generation earlier as a permanent resting place for the Ark of the Covenant, which contained the Ten Commandments. However, a divine edict forbade King David from doing so, saying, "You will not build a house for my name," God reasoned, "for you are a man of battles and have shed blood." But Solomon built the temple nonetheless, and it was built in a way that the inside ceiling was 180 feet long, 90 feet wide, and 50 feet high. The highest point of the temple that King Solomon built was 120 cubits tall, as described in texts. During the building of the first temple, Solomon spared no expense for the building's creation. Vast amounts of cedar woods from King Hiram of Tyre were ordered, had huge blocks of the choicest stone quarried, and commanded that the building's foundation be laid with hewn stone. And to complete this massive project, he levied forced labor on his people, drafting people from work shifts that sometimes lasted a month at a time. A total of 3,300 officials were appointed to supervise the construction work of the temple. After years of work, when the temple was completed, Solomon inaugurated it with prayer and sacrifice. He even invited non-Jews to come and pray. Solomon urged God to pay particular heed to their prayers. Thus all the peoples of the earth will know your name and revere you, as does your people Israel, and they will recognize that your name is attached to this house that I have built. And soon the first temple, apart from serving as a religious place, also became a gathering place for Israelites. But in 587 BCE, the first temple met its fate, and Jews were exiled, which was seen as fulfillment of prophecy. As the Bible predicted, the temple suffered at the hands of Nebuchadrezzar II of Babylonia, who removed the temple treasures in 604 BCE and 597 BCE and destroyed the building in 587-586. This destruction and the deportations of Jews to Babylonia strengthened the faith of Jewish people in the Bible. This exile of Jews was also seen as a fulfillment of prophecy. As the prophet Jeremiah, a very important biblical prophet, criticized his fellow Israelites for not trusting in God fully and for worshiping other gods, but he also promised them that even though they were being punished through the Babylonian exile, God would call them back to Judea in 70 years. And 70 years later, after the story of Purim, many Jews returned to Israel, led by the prophets Ezra and Nehemiah, which fulfilled another prophecy of the Second Temple. Once the Jews returned, they started building the Second Temple on the same site, and once again, sacrifices to God were resumed. Following this, Herod, the Roman-appointed head of Judea during the 1st century BCE, made substantial modifications to the temple and the surrounding mountain, enlarging and expanding the temple. But the Second Temple, however, met the same fate as the first, and was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE, following the failure of the Great Revolt. And the destruction of the first two temples, as described in the Holy Bible, is what makes the construction of the Third Temple a very important topic for Jews. After the destruction of the Second Temple, over the centuries, the Muslims eventually took control of Jerusalem and built two mosques on the Temple Mount, the site of the two Jewish temples. And this made ancient biblical Mount Moriah Jerusalem's most recognizable landscape. To the Jews, it is called the Temple Mount, and to Muslims, it is the Noble Sanctuary. After Mecca and Medina, Muslims regard this site as the third holiest in Islam. Al-Aqsa is the name given to the whole compound and is home to two Muslim holy places, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, also known as the Qibli Mosque, which was built in the 8th century AD. And this is where the differences arise, since any attempt to level these mosques would lead to an international Muslim holy war, jihad against Israel. The temple cannot be rebuilt in the foreseeable future, which angers Jewish people. But if it is next to impossible, then why would Jews still demand the construction of the third temple? Rebuilding the temple, that being the third temple in Jerusalem, has important value in Jewish and Christian scriptures in the book of Ezekiel. Mati Inbari, associate professor of religion at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, said, "Both religions detail a clear beginning of mankind, so there must be a clear end, which the third temple symbolizes." The idea of rebuilding this temple is associated with Messianic beliefs. It is believed in Jewish tradition that as the end times will approach, God will return the Jews to their homeland. Another popular belief is that God will perform a series of miracles, and it is said that the third temple will descend from heaven onto the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which will be one of the miracles. And because of this desire to return home, the third temple holds a special place in the heart of Jewish people, specifically Orthodox Jewish people. Among Orthodox Jews, while they do believe in the rebuilding of the third temple and the resumption of Korban sacrifice, there is disagreement as to how the rebuilding should take place. It is generally believed by the Orthodox scholars and rabbinic authorities that the rebuilding should have taken place in the time of the Jewish Messiah by divine providence. But according to Maimonides, a medieval Jewish philosopher and Torah scholar, the Jews themselves should, wherever possible, build the temple. And that is where opinions of Orthodox and conservative Jews clash. Conservative Jews believe in a Messiah and temple rebuilding, but not in sacrificial restoration. As a result, the Jewish Law and Standards Commission of Conservative Judaism modified the prayer. Now, conservative prayer books call for the restoration of temples, but not for the resumption of sacrifices. For this, the Orthodox study on sacrifice in the daily morning service was replaced with a Talmud passage teaching that sins are atoned for by acts of loving kindness. But the importance of the third temple isn't limited to Jews. According to Darrell Bach, Dallas Theological Seminary senior research professor, the third temple plays a significant role in Christianity as a sign of Jesus' second coming, detailed in the book of Revelation. He further added, "Among Christians, you really have two approaches. One is to say there is not going to be a physical temple per se, but the more well-known view is that there will be. And when it shows up, that's an indication that we're pretty close to the return of Christ." Another reason for the third temple to rebuild is known from the Talmud that in the time of King Agrippa, Jerusalem was filled with millions of visitors and pilgrims from all regions. Some current opinion suggests that the potential for spiritual tourism would support the mayor of Jerusalem's goal of growing 10 million tourists a year. This will give a huge boost to the economy and benefit local and regional people, many of whom live in poverty. But what efforts have been made till now to rebuild the third temple, and why hasn't it been built? Devout Jews have expressed their deep desire to build a third temple on the Temple Mount since the destruction of the second temple in AD 70. Prayer for this is a formal part of the Jewish tradition of praying to Amitabha 3 times daily. Although the third temple has not been built yet, the concept and aspiration of the third temple is sacred in Judaism, especially Orthodox Judaism, and is expected as a place of worship to be built soon. A historic effort was made when in August 1967, Rabbi Shlomo Goren, chief rabbi of the Israel Defense Forces, organized a public prayer for the Jews on the Temple Mount after Israel occupied the mountain. Goren led a group of 50 Jews to the Temple Mount, where they held prayer services while fighting and protesting Muslim guards and Israeli police. Other active members of this movement are the Temple Lab and the Temple Institute. The Temple Lab has created several items for use in the Third Temple, and the Institute has dedicated much effort to recreating the special garments to be worn by the Israelite priests in general and the high priest in particular. But their efforts seem to be useless, as the descriptions given in the Holy Bible of this garb are vague, and the information afforded by the Mishnah isn't much help either. In 2017, the Temple Institute performed a sacrifice near the Temple Mount, a controversial act that resulted in some being arrested. And while their ways have been controversial and criticized, the Temple Institute has made it clear that they won't step back. And to do that, 5 red heifers were flown to Israel from Texas to meet the requirements for resuming temple sacrifices. This requirement comes from Numbers 19, 2, 10, where God commanded a sacrifice of this special heifer whose ashes would be used for the water of purification necessary to purify the priests before they could offer sacrifices. But what is the reason that even after all these preparations, the third temple still has not been built? Will it be ever possible to build the third temple? And will the Messiah ever return? The most immediate and obvious obstacles in the way of rebuilding the third temple are two historic Islamic buildings dating back to the 13th century. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are said to be built in the exact same place as the Second Temple. And this controversial position of the mosque hinders access to these sites or constructs cantilevered Jewish structures in, between, under, beside, or above them. Being such an important place in Islam, if any attempts are made to build structures on the site, it could lead to serious international conflicts. But it is also worth noting that while the Dome of the Rock is believed to occupy the actual space where the Second Temple once stood, some scholars disagree. They say that the temple might be located just north of the Dome of the Rock, or could have been located about 200 meters south of the dome. And this is because the Bible tends to be vague about where the temple should be located. It says, "A place which the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there." These days, it is unanimously accepted that the only site for the Hebrew temple is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. One reason is that the prophets seem to agree that the third temple is to be built in Jerusalem on the site of the first two temples. Thus says Ezekiel in both Isaiah and Micah, oddly in the very same words, "And many people shall go and say, 'Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem.'" As a result of this confusion, most Orthodox Jewish scholars reject any attempt to build a temple before the arrival of the Messiah. Because there are many questions about exactly where it should be built. For example, dimensions are given in cubits, but there is controversy as to whether this unit of measurement equates to the academic consensus of 1.84 feet or the 1.43 feet proposed by the respected historian Asher Selig Kaufman. No altar could be built without knowing the exact size of a cubit. Another obstacle is that if the temple was to be rebuilt following its dedication, it would require a massive workforce of priests and Levites, who would mainly be responsible for the continuous and large-scale ritual slaughter of animals aimed at appeasing the deity, which is against what conservative Jews believe. And now, tensions between Jews and Muslims over the Temple Mount have politically taken over as one of the major flashpoints of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has reduced the chances of the temple constructing peacefully. So will the Third Temple become a reality? Many people believe that we are nearing the end of the world, and the second coming of Jesus Christ is happening. And the biggest sign of this is the return of Jews to Israel. As chapter 29 of the book of Jeremiah says 14, "And I will be found by you, says the Lord, and I will return your captivity and gather you from all the nations and from all the places where I have driven you, says the Lord, and I will return you to the place whence I exiled you." So whether the temple ascends from heaven or is built by Jews, it is clear that the Messiah is coming,